The year is 1697, and March 13th, and the Spanish are poised to conquer the capital of the Itza Kingdom, the last independent state in the Yucatan. Leading them is Martin de Ursula, determined to complete what was started 200 years ago by Pedro Alvarado, who subdued vast swaths of the Maya. Now it is Ursula's turn to finish the job. Hey there, fellow pro gamers. Before we get started, I'd like to just say that this channel is a firm believer in the Great Replacement theory. Yes, those bastard evil cats plot against us in their secret cat council at the top of the Pyramid of Giza. They're planning at this very moment to overthrow the world. One day, I'll climb to the top and expose those furry little adorably cute shits for the menace that they truly are. But they're not really relevant. You want proper endings to jokes? Well, fuck off. For the past 200 years, the Spanish have been waging a on-again, off-again war against the Mayan civilization, gradually conquering the many native kingdoms until just a few remained, all of them centered around the Petén Basin. There were a few different people in the Petén Basin, all of whom I'm about to brutally mispronounce, so I completely slaughter their name. So we had the Kowoj, the Chinamita, Quejas, Icaish, Racandon, Cheol, Manch Cheol, the Mopan, the Itza, and the Yarain. All of them are worth knowing in their own right, but the Itza most of all. They were remarkably warlike, apparently, to the point that they allegedly impressed the Spaniards and other natives alike, and their capital was called Noj Petén, a city built on an island surrounded by a lake. The city was founded around 1441 or 1446 by the Itza Mayans, who apparently had fled south from Mayapan, but settlements on the island date back to around 900 to 600 BC. This video will focus on the last war that the Spanish fought against Mayans, but I will say this for context. The first years of Mayan-Spanish conflict were fought during the years of 1524 to 1541. It ended with Alvarado establishing a colony in the south of modern-day Guatemala. By 1546, most of the Yucatan was subjugated, leaving only the natives in the Petén Basin and Belize, who were left mostly alone, save for some Franciscan priests who entered the area in 1618, and they reportedly found an old cross that was left behind by none other than Hernan Cortés on his last expedition to the area some 90 years ago. His expedition to the area, like every other expedition after the Aztecs, was a complete failure. But that's a story for another day. The story of the Itza is the one for this video, the last of the Mayans to be conquered at the turn of the century. Now, as I sort of pointed, the Itza had been left mostly alone by the Spaniards since Cortés's expedition in 1524, and the arrival of the Franciscan priests in 1618. But that does not mean that they were unaware of their existence. A 18th century Spanish historian by the name of Villa Gutierrez, meaning he's a objectively flawless source, who, by the way, said this on the Itza state of affairs during this period of isolation specifically. And don't worry, I kept in all the racist moments. It is now many years that the barbarous Itzacs, more than any other nation of infidels, have been terrifying all those provinces. For, since the time when Don Fernando Cortés passed through their land, and those events, which have already been told happened to them, no further attempts had been made to bring about their reduction, or to make war upon them in order to subjugate them, and this was on account of the prohibition given by the king and settlers and orders. So, besides the obvious hate for those icky natives, the most interesting thing he says is why Spanish conquistadors didn't conquer the kingdom. They weren't allowed to. I couldn't find a specific reason why, but I'm guessing that Spain had other concerning shit on their mind. I mean, plus, what's a sack of potatoes to the mountains of whores and drugs that you already got? However, in 1614, an interesting event happens. Those horrible, deviant, evil Itza natives submit themselves to the rule of the Spaniards. They spoke to the governor of the captaincy of the Yucatan at the time, Diego de Cardenas, and they asked to be put under the crown's rule, which, of course, he accepted, before turning around and asking the Council of Indies for permission to conquer the Itza. Huh? Exactly. But why? Well, because the Itza were only messing around. They didn't intend to become subjects of the crown, but really they had become subjects, so Diego wouldn't be waging a war on an independent kingdom and breaking the law. No, he'd be putting down a filthy fucking rebellion. But by the way, there is plenty of reason to assume that the request to be put under the crown's rule was legitimate. The current king of the Itza was personally friendly to the Spanish and was massively interested in the Catholic traditions, though he himself remained a Mayan through and through. And so it was. From 1614 to 1697, there was a sort of intermittent state of hostilities between Yucatan specifically and the Itza kingdom. And for now, the governor Diego was in charge of putting down a quote-unquote rebellion. And beyond maybe himself, no one gave two shits about this war. I'll get to that, but let's continue along with the story. It would take nearly 7 years before a real effort to beat the Itzas was made. Governor Diego de Cardenas entrusts the conquest of the Itzas to Captain Mirones, who sets off with around 500 soldiers and a certain number of Mayan warriors. They are then joined by the Franciscan friar Diego Delgado. The expedition stopped for a while at the village of Zacrun, where, as they waited for reinforcements, Delgado began working in administering the village. All the while, Mirones, with a grace of the almighty, all-kind Christian God who preaches love and acceptance, began to brutally oppress the locals, who had already suffered from forced labor and other equally nice things. This naturally caused some trouble between the friar and captain. What the fuck, bro? Huh? What's going on? Why are you killing all of these poor Indians? We need the money? And they're not people? I don't understand what's got you all worked up. They are subjects of the Spanish crown and Christianized. I'll remind you that this treatment is exactly why the king made laws forbidding it. Do you see the king here? You'll start an uprising if you keep this up. I'm not worried. They're not real Catholics, nor do they have any real weapons. I mean, they're scared of our diseases. I try to sneeze near them now. Their reactions are just hilarious. I mean, man, someone ought to make a place where they collectively show how the natives are owned through epic pranks. Delgado broke off from the expedition, and he instead traveled alone, and with a Christianized Mayan, to the kingdom itself. Mirones learned of this, and he sent 12 soldiers after him, whom, upon failing to convince him to return, traveled with him the rest of the way. And indeed, Delgado arrived much earlier than Mirones to Najpetan, the capital of the Itza, where again they were welcomed quite well by the ruling king, until they let their guard down, and apparently all of them were brutally murdered. Delgado himself was chopped up into pieces, and his head was placed on a stake around Najpetan. The 13 soldiers were all killed and similarly had their heads put on stakes. Now, why did they do this to a poor friar? Well, according to the Spanish sources, they were evil dicks who got what they deserved. And frankly, they don't look like me, so yeah, they had it coming. But honestly, I would guess that either there had been significant skirmishes between the independent Itza and the Spanish, or some way, somehow, Diego's desire to conquer them had leaked to the Itza. There's also just a chance that the Itza were fucking tired of friars popping up asking them for them to love Jesus, so take from this what you will. But Morones was still around, sitting on his ass at Zakrun, but around, and he had received no word from the 13 soldiers he sent out, so he sent 2 more men and a Mayan Christian by the name of Bernardino Eck as scouts to figure out what happened. They stopped first at a small Mayan village by the name of Tipu, where they learned that the friar had come through there and went on his way to Itza, to Najpetan. So the 3 men, after a while, arrived at the lake shore, where they likely could see the city in the distance. They built a small fire in order to send out a smoke signal, and some canoes came for them. And when they arrived, they were immediately thrown into jail. Again, the friendly Itzas were no more. They may have been aware of the Spanish plans to conquer them, or just sick of Europeans popping into their home. I'm not really sure. Bernardino led an escape attempt, but while he managed to get onto a boat and off of the lake, the 2 soldiers who were with him weren't so lucky. But Bernardino had learned of the fate of Delgado and the 13 soldiers. This next part isn't so important to the overall story, but I just find it funny. Morones, after having lost his friar Delgado, asked the local authorities to send a new one over, which they did. A friar by the name of Juan de Berrio. Berrio? I don't know. Apparently this friar arrived at Zakrun, saw the shit show that Morones was performing with the natives, and went back home. Apparently being told by his superiors, good job, when giving his report, and they refused any more requests by Morones to send a new friar. So, you remember that thing Delgado said would happen if Morones kept being a dick to the Zakrun natives? That uprising? Yeah, it sorta happened. Still in 1624, the Zakrun Spaniards, who were still waiting for their reinforcements this whole goddamn time, went to mass in a local church. They were just there, chilling, no weapons at their sides, and they all got butchered by the natives. Morones, the soldiers, and possibly even Bernardino as well, as he had arrived and informed Morones of Delgado's fate. All of them were killed. The Mayans who did it promptly fled to the woods and reportedly began worshipping Mayan gods again. The Spaniards' bodies were later found by the reinforcements that they had been waiting for, and they, in turn, returned home after burying the corpses. And that was it. The first real effort to conquer the Itzas. It failed before it could even begin. And after that, it would take nearly 7 years before another real effort to conquer them. Only in 1697. Roads! They're kinda cool, right? The Spanish thought so too, and they wanted one between Guatemala and the Yucatan, and they decided, after a while, that the road should go through the Petén Basin, through the Itza Kingdom. And now, we're back here, to Martin Ursua. He is where we will focus on for a good bit. Martin was a Basque nobleman residing in New Spain. I'm aware it's like Martin, whatever the fuck. I'm going to say Martin, because I want to, alright? But yeah, he was residing in New Spain, specifically Mexico, and his luck was about to change. After a series of accusations were thrown at the last Yucatan governor, Don Roque de Soberanis, the king decides to appoint Martin as the governor of the Yucatan, and he informs the king that he intends to have as his priority the conversion of all remaining natives in the Yucatan, and to do that, he needs a road. That road. So he goes and he asks the king for permission. Hey, could you let me build a road between the Yucatan and Guatemala? Holy fucking shit, dude, a road? The king gave him all that he desired, literally commanding the governor of New Spain, the local religious orders, and the governor of Guatemala to help him. Donations were even encouraged, with a sort of reward system put in place to whomever donated money or supplies to the project. But still, as expected, there were hundreds of issues that sprung up for Martin and the others, all the way from just the seasons making everyone sick, to natives springing up, killing fuckers, and promptly fucking off. But built the road would be. So let's fast forward about a year or two to 1696. Martin is building his road heading south towards Petén, and the governor of Guatemala is building a road heading north to connect with Martin, right smack dab in its territory. That's a bit of an issue. So we have Juan de Velasco, a captain, who is the temporary leader of the Guatemalan side of the project, and as established, Martin leads the Yucatan side. All the while, the current Itza king is a man I think is called Canek. The Guatemalan expedition stops at a settlement called Cahabon in January 1696, an important place for their road, but one that's completely fucked over and not ready for the road. They stop there while waiting for the actual leader of the expedition, Dr. Don Bartolome de Amezquita. I'll refer to him as Amezquita. It was decided at Cahabon that Juan de Velasco would lead a significant component of troops ahead of the main expedition until they reached Nojpetan's lakeshore. His main goal was to figure out Canec's attitude towards the Spanish and the oncoming, that also sounds the dual expeditions which are coming over. Their progress was swift, and they sent daily letters back towards the main body of the expedition, with reports on their progress until they stopped receiving letters. It's a simple reason. When Velasco reached the shore, like the big dick captain he was, he and his men boarded some canoes and made for the city. The moment they landed, they were killed. Amezquita did learn of his captain's fate, but having too little men to do anything meant that he soon withdrew back to Guatemala City. Ursula heard of this failure, and he tried a few times to send more expeditions to take Nojpetan, all of whom were either defeated and gave up on the way. So Ursula had enough. If Itza were to fall, it would do so by his hands. The last Mayan kingdom would at last die at the hands of a Basque colonial governor. He took every preparation he could, gathering the materials needed for siege weapons and boats. And it was on. Soldiers built warboats in a river that washed up at Nojpetan, and they stole canoes there, while Martin camped 2 leagues from the lake, or 11 kilometers. And by early March 1697, the Spanish war machine had assembled right on the Itza doorstep. Sometime later, however, a group of natives popped up by sea. They were welcomed onto the camp, they promised niceness, "Oh, we're totally cool with your big army here," and all of them agreed to meet back in the Spanish camp, this time including Canek, for dinner, so they can talk this out like gentlemen. But of course, the natives were liberals, and liberals gotta ruin everything. And instead of dinner with the king, the Itza popped up with dozens of canoes and hundreds of big, sexy, sweaty warriors ready for an ass-kicking. Ursula, Martin, calls for a war council before the battle. The captains all wanted blood. But Ursua had a sticky upper manager to please, the king. The same laws still applied. The king did not want a war. This was decades after the former governor of the Yucatan, Diego's attempts to conquer them. Ursua was not putting down a rebellion, like Diego once claimed. He was starting a war for a road. Ursua apparently decided to not engage in battle, and instead went to Petin Grande, which was another 11 kilometers from his camp. Petin Grande was another native settlement which they found mostly abandoned, and it turns out that all the natives there had either fled across the lake or into the lake to protect themselves from Spain. What they did find was a large-ass fleet of Itza canoes who fired arrows non-stop at them, and despite the fact that Ursua said don't fire, the soldiers began firing off their guns. The battle in Nojpetan itself barely lasted a full day. By 8 a.m. it had finished. The Spanish suffered only minor casualties, while most of the Itza died either in the fighting itself or drowning as they fled from the city. Canek likely died in the fighting. The standard of Jesus Christ was set up. The royal arms were engraved over the door of what had been the principal temple, and thanks were given to God for the victory. Ursua would return to the Yucatan, and his governorship ended within a year, while the newly conquered territory would be ruled by some other Spaniard who fought in the battle, as Martin himself did not have any interest in it. And the road, at last, was built, straight through the territories of the now vanquished Mayans. As for the capital, well, you know Nojpetan nowadays as Tayasal, or Flores. It still exists, and so do the Mayans. I've said this before, but no, they aren't wiped out at all. There's an estimated 8 million of them alive, in keeping most of the Mayan traditions alive. Hopefully not the bloodletting though. But they are around, and I encourage you to look them up, because it is a fucking fascinating culture and equally interesting history. I also want to highlight this paper that I used from Gutenberg.org. It's a fantastic piece, just literally focusing entirely on the history of the Itzes, all of it. I encourage you to read it, as there are some stories and details that I left out. But that's it. Thanks for watching.